Welcome to the channel. Today's colors, we'll go over here. Permanent yellow light, madder lake, or permanent alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, titanium white, and then I'm using a quick drying medium made by Royal Talents in their Cobra Professional line. These are all water mixable oils today. The canvas we're using is a canvas panel that's been stained with transparent red oxide. It is an 11 by 14 panel, and I'm using a Maybach French easel, full box easel, and the palette that comes with it. Got a couple of round brushes. These are all Hogs bristle brushes. They're made by most of these are some of these are different lines, but they're made by Princeton is the company. Ashley is the primary line. There's also a couple of their Imperial line and also one of their Aspen line. The Aspen one is just a synthetic fiber instead, and it's what you call a liner, and it's a number 2 liner. Here I'm using a round, using a dark mixture of the Madder Lake, which is or rather a permanent alizarin crimson in other lines, mixed with ultramarine blue. And then I'm taking that reference photo that I showed you at the very beginning of this video and sketching the major shapes that I saw in it. In today's video, we're going to focus, or at least I'm going to focus in terms of my talking to you on seven things to avoid when you are painting in oil. So I'm not very good at counting sometimes, so there could be more than 7. There might be a few less than 7. I think it'll be more than 7, actually. And I'm even going to give you some bonus coverage of some things I really hate about other painting videos that I've watched. And I'd be interested to hear what some of your comments are so that I can try to avoid some of those things. One of the reasons I'm doing these painting videos is because I have found some of the others that are available on YouTube not all that helpful. So maybe you are in agreement with me, and I'll tell you a few of the reasons why here in just a minute. Number one is so quickly into the video, even before they've began painting, if you ever notice with many of these videos, the author will tell you, subscribe, check out my other videos, go to my website, buy some of my paintings. I mean, they give you 5, 6, 7 different actions that they want you to take, and you don't even know if they're any good yet. You haven't had a chance to really see what they're painting, and already they're hollering at you in the first 30 seconds of their video to go and subscribe and to give them a thumbs up and all these other actions. So I try to avoid doing that. And so you will often notice that my videos, I'm well into 10, 20 minutes before I mention that, because I do want you to honestly want to watch some of these videos. And I don't want to put a bunch of pressure on you right at the beginning to subscribe, especially if this is the first time you've seen any of my videos. Do take your time. So, and having said that, now I can go in to say, yes, by all means, I would love for you to subscribe, and I would love for you to give me a thumbs up, and I would love for you to make some comments about it. But please know that that's not as big of an expectation. One of the reasons I paint videos here is that I think it is an interesting art form. In other words, painting is one form of artistic expression, and I love to paint. And so I'm always painting, and sometimes they turn out, sometimes they don't. And for the most part, when I can remember to do it and my battery is full, I take a video of it. And I think that adds something. In other words, it's not just a painting anymore. It is the whole painting process, which can be videoed. And I almost see the video and the voiceover and the painting that has been created in this process all as one distinct unit. And putting all those components together, to me, provides you with an experience which you would not have if all you had was the painting, or just the video, or just a lecture on painting. Does that make sense to folks? I also hope that maybe at some point in time, I'm an older painter. I'm 54 years of age at this point in time. I'm hoping that part of the reason I'm doing this is to leave my family with a little bit of a legacy. I would love to have my grandkids. I've got two grandkids at this point, Briar and Lincoln. I would love for them and for other family members at some point in history that who knows, whenever I leave this earth, it would be kind of nice if these videos were still on YouTube and my grandchildren and other descendants could actually watch me paint and see how much joy it brought me as I talk about the painting process and some of the things that I enjoyed about painting. And maybe they can also get a sense of who I was from listening to my voice, from the conversations I'm having as I'm painting. And so that's one of the reasons I do this. And I think that mistake number 2 for painting videos is that so many of these painting videos seem to only be about generating income and making money. And you get the impression that sometimes that is the only goal that some of these artists have is by making money. And this is just another way to add some dollars through YouTube as they paint. And you know what I'm talking about. These are sometimes the painting videos that the painting itself seems kind of slapped together for the sole purpose of having another video released on a schedule of every 6 or 7 days. And so I want to try to avoid that mistake as well. Here I'm just mixing another pile of the dark mixture and now going into it with a green. So I've got the bold shapes, the dark value blocks already in. I did the sketch and I'm beginning to apply the darks, and now we're turning to color. And right with that same pool of color, you don't have to always mix a nice little tidy new pool of color on your palette or scrape it off every time. You can work right into it, and that can actually help you judge the value in comparison to the other colors. So here we go. You can see that I'm putting some darker greens into the painting with this large tree shape. This, by the way, is the reference photo is a picture I took, just a very common picture. There's not anything particularly amazing about the photo that I'm using, and that was part of the reason I wanted to use that, was to show you how you can take an ordinary painting, a picture rather, and hopefully turn it into a work of art. You don't always have to have tremendous reference photos, nor do you have to think about replicating life. After all, if you just wanted to replicate life, you could just take a photo anyway, right? Why would there be a need to paint something? So at any rate, that's one of the reasons I selected that particular reference photo today. This is of the Missouri River, which is an overview near Hermann, Missouri, is where I took that photo. And this was taken before the fall, obviously, so I believe it was early September, maybe even August, when I took that photo. And so now it is December, and I'm working in the studio much more because I don't like to paint a lot when it's so cold outside. So I'm using some of these photos that I took earlier in the summer and the fall. Now you notice I add a little bit of titanium white. This allows this tree line on the other side of the river to be pushed back. And like I've told you in other videos, you have to get a lot of these colors down first before you really have any idea if they're actually going to work, because everything is in relationship to everything else. All right, mistake number 3, if you're counting with me, and I hope I'm counting correctly. So, mistake number 3, for both painting videos and for painting in general, is that many people put too many colors on their palette. Would you agree? I've seen a lot of painting videos in which it seemed like they were just trying to sell you paint. You know, here's Michael Harding, and I've got 20 colors on here. And then you go online and you discover, oh my goodness, I don't think I want to pay, 30 bucks for a small tube of 37 ounce, 37, what is that, 37 ounces? No, milliliters, right? Anyway, a small little tube of Michael Harding that's going to set me back 30 some dollars. And then I'm going to spread out 30 little things of paint on my palette every time I paint. That's ridiculous. So what I would recommend is one of the biggest mistakes I see painters make, or even paint videos if they're using this method, is to try to sell you a bunch of colors that you absolutely do not need. As you saw my palette almost at the beginning of every single painting I've done, it's a very limited palette. Mostly it is just the primaries with the addition of titanium white and burnt umber. You can vary the different colors in terms of what your primaries are going to be. I've seen some artists that do that on a regular basis. Maybe one day they may paint with a yellow, and their one yellow is going to be yellow ochre, and maybe their red is going to be burnt sienna, and maybe their blue is going to be ivory black. That's fine, but if you're looking for something that will get you to almost anything that you want to paint, the 3 colors I would recommend would be cad yellow light, or you could go with a Hansa yellow light. That's a synthetic yellow, a more modern color. You could also, for the red, I would highly recommend Alizarin Crimson Permanent, or just Alizarin Crimson. There's some debate as far as how the longevity of Alizarin Crimson. It's what we know as a fugitive color, so you may want to study that and see if you want to include that on your palette or not, or you want to go to a permanent Alizarin Crimson. I will tell you this, in my experience, the permanent Alizarin Crimsons never seem to be quite the same color as Alizarin Crimson is. And I know that Alizarin Crimson has its problems, but that seems to be especially the case when you're using it right out of the tube. So as long as you're using it in mixtures and you are preserving your paintings with a high quality varnish, at least once they are dry to the touch, or even a year after you've created the painting, if you're applying your varnish when they tell you to, then you should be okay using Alizarin Crimson. So I always have Alizarin Crimson as my red. And then for the blue, I tend to use ultramarine blue. Some artists will also use, if they've only got one blue, they may go with a cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is a little bit colder, in my opinion. Ultramarine blue goes towards the red side, so it's a little bit warmer. And I would prefer the ultramarine blue if it was me, but you could also try cobalt blue. And obviously, you will learn in the process of painting what primary color you think works the best in most situations. If you want power colors, obviously, if you have a fire truck in your landscape, Alizarin Crimson is not going to do it. If you've got plants that look like they came from another world, you may need a phthalo blue, which will get you some very vivid greens. So at any rate, what I'm suggesting is if you want a couple of power colors, I would get the small tubes, 37 milliliter to 40 milliliters, usually what the manufacturers have for the small tubes, and it's usually 150 to perhaps 200 milliliters for the large tubes, right? So you may want to add a small tube of cadmium red light, would be the color I would recommend at this point in time, and then another small tube of the phthalo blue. And have those in your box. You don't need a lot of those two colors, and that way, if you do need to get to some really bright or intense oranges or something of this nature, you have those two colors available. Or like I said, a red fire truck in your scene, you may need some kind of a different power red. All right, so as we're discussing these things, and you're watching me paint today, here you can see that I've I've gotten the mixture. It looks very gray on this surface at this point, but you see where I've put the shadows of the grasses of the trees on the other side of the river into the what's going to be the river. And oftentimes rivers look very dirty. Let's just face it. And sometimes we actually put more blue in it just because it looks better and sells better when you have paintings that have a little bit more bright and vivid colors. But if you're trying to paint more realistic, oftentimes the color of rivers is going to be a kind of dirty green. So, so that's what we're going with here. And then I varied the shade of green for the landmass in the foreground area. As you can see, these are slight variations, right? And I think that when you have slight variations in the color, that really intensifies the realism. If you're looking to paint more realistic paintings, I wouldn't describe this as really that realistic today. I'm more in the mind of an impressionist here. So getting that foreground in with some different greens and this is what I would call my block end stage, is trying to shoot for the middle values that I can come back to later on in the painting and then add some variations to. And oftentimes, as far as cleaning brushes off, another mistake. Here we go. I don't know which one we're up to. Are we up to 4 or 5? Another mistake I see a lot of painters do in these videos is taking so much time to clean brushes. Now, once in a while, you do need to scrape off your palette like I'm doing here. But oftentimes, we overdo the cleaning of the brushes as we're trying to paint the scene. And then that only creates more mud and dirtier colors. So take a shop towel or take a bounty towel or whatever roll of paper towels you have. Take a sheet. Don't be stingy. Clean your brushes off with one of those. And don't stick it into the Gamsol. Don't stick it into water even if you're using water mixable oils like I am today. Just wipe it off as best you can with the paper towel and allow some of that other paint to sit on the brush. If you're worried about dirtying some of your lighter mixtures a little too much, then designate a couple of your brushes only for darks and a couple of your brushes only for lights. And then reach for them when you are needing a particular shade. Of course, I always work from the darker colors to the lighter colors. And then, as you can see here, I picked up a new brush, one that I hadn't put any paint on, and in order to grab the titanium white and a little bit of ultramarine blue to create a sky color that I'm going to start painting now. This keeps the darks and the lights separate. It avoids having to take so much time to wash your brushes out, because invariably if you're too concentrating on getting your brush completely clean, that's all you're going to be doing is cleaning your brushes, because the brushes are constantly going to be getting dirty every time you pick up paint and put it on the surface. So don't spend so much time doing that. You can always, the only time I really like to clean my brush too much is when I'm doing the transition from the dark colors to the lights. I will sometimes take a brush that's been used for the darks and wash that out completely to put the lights on. Or, most of the time what I do is I wait until the painting is entirely done and only clean my brushes with the water or the Gamsol or paint thinner, what have you, after the painting session is completely done. Now here, I'm just taking that light mixture and putting it close to that row of trees. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that, once again, I don't get my brush too dirty or get it mixed in with that tree line. And so I leave a little bit of a gap so that way I can focus and provide a little bit more artistic license with that tree line when I go back for a second pass, and then I don't get too much mud into the painting that way. And see how I'm painting into these shapes as well. And I'll come back in and take care of these edges later on. Sky holes, you notice I'm now putting in some sky holes, and you'll say, hey, that's the same color you put in the sky. That's not going to work out, is it? Because if this is supposed to be a little bit more realistic, it's certainly not going to be the same color as the sky. You're absolutely correct. Here's another problem that I see that artists do. Maybe we're up to 5 or 6 now. Is that we spend too much time trying to be exact with these sky holes. If you use this color right now, and then you come back in your process and give the greens another pass in terms of looking at those edges and softening those edges with the brush, or if you're a cotton Q-tip, or with your brush, etc., or a palette knife, you will darken those blues that I just put in, and it will actually tend to look fairly good after you're done with it. So don't sweat that. Put them in now if you wish to, like I just did in this particular painting, and watch what happens later on. And you might be amazed that you don't really have to be that careful with sky holes. Yes, right now it looks like they're just blobs of color on there. They don't really look like trees, and it looks a little funny. Certainly not very realistic, because those edges have not been softened yet, but we'll get there. Now, into the pool of color. And here's another mistake, maybe I already mentioned it, is how many painters will make a new pool for that color adjustment instead of just leaving one pool of color on your palette, and then take a little bit more of that saturated color and mix it right on the palette, even inside of that little pool of color, so that you can judge the values. Obviously, this is a little darker, a little colder, if you will, than the other blue that I put on the surface. So here, you notice I'm leaving this orange gap from the underpainting between the two. Why? Because I want there to be a gradual color difference as the painting develops. And for my process, I'd like to leave some gaps sometimes, so that way I can clean off my brush with the paper towel and come back in with a virtually clean, dry brush, and mix those two colors together to get a nice effect. So you'll see that in just a minute. And so here we go, putting in this second shade, a little bit darker blue, as we're going up in the atmosphere. Whenever you're looking at the skyline sometime, notice how it gets darker blue as your eyes go upwards. So keep that in mind. And I'm going to mix a little bit more of the ultramarine blue into the titanium white before I put some color on the very top of the canvas today. Or actually, this is a canvas board, if you will. And here I am making the mixture. Well, here's another thing that I don't like about some painting videos that I've watched. If you ever watch a video in which they never show you them making the color mixtures, you see the blobs of color go up on the surface, and that's it. And then you're left to wonder, what colors did they use? Especially if they are not using a very simple palette where you could pretty much figure out that it's just a variation of the amount of blue or green or yellow that they're using. So that is a pet peeve of mine. And maybe it is yours, because I've noticed that several of you have mentioned that. In some of my early videos, I'm getting used to this, I didn't hold the palette up well enough sometimes to allow you to see me trying to mix the colors. Um, but it is important to be able to see that. The other pet peeve I have about painting videos, not so much the painting process, is how many artists will tease us. You click on it thinking that you're going to see a complete painting, and it's not. What it is a promo. It's just a promo promoting the artists and their work, attempting to get you to buy their painting, and maybe learn a little bit of painting along the way, but not much, because what they'll do is when they get to the more complex section of a painting, what do? They speed up the video. And so there you are. You see a basic little blob of paint get up there, and then suddenly it's speed number 12, and you're racing through half of the painting process and unable to really keep up. So if you wanted to try to paint along with the artist, you certainly can't do it with those videos. If you were wanting to try to see what kind of color mixtures they were making with the colors on their palette that they had given you at the very start of the painting process on the video, you can't do that. And you just are left rather frustrated because you're not really getting the full effect. And now I know why certain artists do that. Some of them hope to be so well known that they'll be able to make a video of their painting process and sell it for a lot of money. But I don't know about you, but I do not have over $100 to spend on painting videos. If I had that kind of money, I think I might just buy some of the paintings I see professional artists do, so that I might decorate my home with some of that. So, and I think that's fine, and I understand why artists do that, and they want to sell their workshops, and they would like you to attend those and to buy their videos that are for sale rather than to give you everything for free. And that's understandable. However, I think you can do both. I think you can do videos, you can show people your entire process, and trust that there are lots of people out there that are more than willing to help us artists with some support financially. In the future, I am working on right now putting my videos on Patreon, so that way folks who feel so inclined, who would like to support me in more ways than simply watching the videos here on YouTube, could get the commercial free version on Patreon one day, and also sign up to maybe sponsor a certain dollar amount every month to assist me in my development as an artist. And I really think that a lot of folks are apparently doing this, because Patreon, there are a lot of artists already asking for support and receiving it. That's great. So I think we need to trust the public more and not worry so much about what we're giving away in videos. And you can always learn in workshops, because in workshops you are hopefully not just watching your artist paint demonstrations, but my goodness, I would hope it would be more than that. That the artist would go around and help you as you are working on a painting, giving you advice, seeing how you apply the paint, getting to understand how you're thinking about your painting. And that's what would be most helpful to you, not simply going to a workshop in order to watch a famous artist just stand there and paint a painting and talk to you, as I am, or anybody could do that on the video. So if you're in person, I would hope that the learning structure changes. And I think it's a mistake to assume that you can't do both and make money at art by giving a direct instruction, by producing certain videos that outline everything, and also providing some things like this where there's minimum cost to viewership, and hopefully you're making some money on AdSense through YouTube And like I said, maybe a generous monthly donation through Patreon. And that way you can have more videos rather than just a couple videos about how to paint. And then, of course, the key also, I've also noticed, here's another mistake. Maybe this is are we up to number 7 now? Maybe we're up to number 7. The other mistake I often see is that beginners or even intermediate painters, we can all get very seduced by our heroes who tell us, well, here's my palette. These are the colors I use. These are the brushes I use. These are the painting surfaces I use. Go out and buy all this stuff and see if it works for you. Well, it may work for you that way, but I don't really want anyone who's studying me to paint exactly like me. I want you to develop your own style, your own sense of, of artistry, and that only happens if you're painting. You need to paint more and discover what you can do as you manipulate the paint, as you draw your shapes, as you play with the landscapes that are in front of you in terms of composition, in terms of color, etc. Every one of us has a unique artistic vision, and I don't want you to be stifled by trying to live up to some expectation or to paint just like your star painter does. Um, no one really wants to buy paintings that look like that, for one thing. People are most interested with folks that are very different. And I have to admit, this is one mistake I made when I was painting earlier, is that I would look at these paintings and think, wow, I really like how this artist paints. I'll buy a video. I'll get the paints that this person recommends and then try to do it myself. And almost every time I did that, it was a complete and utter failure. I'll give you a prime example. I really like the work of an artist by the name of Charlie Hunter. Maybe you've seen him. Maybe you've seen some of his paintings. He paints basically with two colors in plein air. They're part of the Cobra line. He paints with water mixable oils. He uses, I think it's raw umber and Dick Van Dyke Brown, I think, are the two colors he normally uses. And he can produce wonderful paintings. Most of the time, his strength is architectural buildings that are in the landscape, not just landscape by itself. Although he does that as well in this very monochromatic uh, color scheme. And he talks about the fact you don't need a lot to tell the story. Wonderful. Wonderful paintings. Would love to paint like Charlie Hunter. Got some of those paintings, products that he suggested, and did a few attempts. It's not me. Now, sometimes you have to do that in order to grow, right? Have some failures, try some new colors, try some new techniques. The thing that I found out is that I love color too much. I just can't abandon it. Every time I tried to paint like Charlie Hunter, I was wanting to have a green on my palette, or at least colors I could mix a really good green with, and really wanted to focus on some color in the telling of my stories. I just can't limit myself to browns, and I'm also not as impressed in terms of my own desire to paint architectural structures. I much prefer the natural world and painting trees and rivers and skies as a subject matter than, say, buildings that are collapsing or things that look like they might have been old photographs. Now, I still love Charlie Hunter's work, and he has some wonderful paintings. But will I ever paint like him? No. I'm my own person. I have to paint my own landscapes, and I have to figure out on my own through practice, constantly painting almost every single day, and that's what you will find will lead to your own artistic voice. And so, yes, watch these videos. Obviously, I want you to watch my videos. Watch other people's videos, learn different techniques, try them out. Keep in mind, though, that you also need to do your own experimenting. I would say that there are some things that would be very helpful for you. And for example, I've already told you this, a limited palette with just the primaries, titanium white and burnt umber. I would start with that for any artist, unless you really do think that you'd like to paint like Charlie Hunter and just get a couple of browns and see what you can do with that. But keep it simple and don't add a bunch of colors until you know how to manipulate the ones that we told you about here, because you can get almost anywhere you want with these colors. And keep in mind, paint manufacturers want to sell you as many paints as possible. So they're going to give us all kinds of yellow varieties, all kinds of red varieties, all kinds of blue varieties, and other colors that we don't even need, like grays to gray down stuff. Why would you need to buy a tube of gray? You can make your own gray. Okay, you just mix all three colors together. You're going to get a kind of a dark, add a little bit of titanium white. There you got it. So be careful about that. All right, so back to this painting today and see what I'm doing. So now I painted the darks in. I've got the sky in, as you can tell. I painted the foreground with basically a neutral green. The river color is now in there because I took some of the sky color from the top portions of the sky and mixed in just a little bit more yellow to dirty down the water, and then put that in. And now I have softened the edge of this tree unit, group of trees rather, on the right hand of the painting. And I'm going back in with the lighter green mixture. And see how this makes it simple? You know the colors I've used because I only have one yellow. That's in this case, that's permanent yellow light. And I'm mixing in various amounts of ultramarine blue to produce the variations on the palette and on the painting. So here is where the sunlight is hitting the tree branches and the leaves. And so I'm going back in over the darks where the dark meets the sky, and then covering up with this. Hopefully this gives me a nice realistic type effect of the sun and how the sun changes the colors on the tree depending on the time of day, depending on the viewer, etc. Now, obviously, as you can tell, I'm kind of obliterating some of the darks. So I will go back in here and paint some darks here next. Notice, though, that the sky holes are no longer looking as if they are distinct pieces of paint from everything else. They have already darkened down because of what I have done with the leaves and the lines and the edges in that large shape. Here I'm just varying the pressure, as you see that on the tree groupings, to get a little bit different effect of the color. Here, adding a little bit more of the yellow, which is my primary, and adding a little bit of titanium white to lighten that up, which also makes that temperature a little colder, by the way. Titanium white's a cold color. And now I'm trying to just vary the brush strokes in the foreground to give what I and other artists often refer to as the illusion of detail, of different grasses growing in this landscape that are closer to the viewer and therefore will be a little bit larger At the same time, I don't want the viewer to spend a lot of time in the foreground. Obviously, the focal point is where that river is meeting the group of trees on the right. Once again, this is the time of the video when I think it would be appropriate. If you like the content and what you're experiencing, please consider subscribing to my channel so that way you'll be notified when I uh, publish a new video. And I'm doing so at a pretty quick clip, as you've noticed. So, love to have you continue to watch these and learn with me. And give a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind. Now, some people may be asking, well, David, you're not as professional as many artists out there. Obviously, you are younger in terms of your experience level. Why would I want to watch your videos and subscribe to your channel as opposed to other artists that are out there? Well, here's one thing that you may want to consider if you're contemplating that. Oftentimes, I find in my own process, I found artists that weren't the best to watch their videos. Why? Number one, they were sometimes struggling with some of the same issues that I was struggling with, and they were able to describe ways that made sense for me and helped me that some of the professional artists didn't even talk about or discuss because they were so far advanced that they were no longer even addressing those questions. Does that make sense? The other is for inspiration. You look at me and you think, hey, I may not be able to produce a painting that looks like McPherson or let's see, Susie Baker or Laurie McNee, but I could produce a painting that looks like this guy. And that's exactly right. That's one of the reasons I watched a lot of artists that were not on the cover of Plein Air magazine, um, because that helped me understand that I could get better, and that I could get better with increments rather than from nothing to stardom. And so I think there is a place for artists of all levels, even in teaching and using videos on YouTube. I think another big mistake, I think I've already gone over 7, but at any rate, I think another big mistake in painting in oils is to assume that we can't learn from each other and that we can't learn from anyone but a master painter. You can learn from folks that are maybe not all that much different or advanced than you are. And maybe too, if you come away with, at least for me, I I hope that there are many of you that paint a lot better than me, and maybe this will give you the confidence to say, you know what, if this fella has the confidence of painting and doing videos of it, well, maybe I can do the same thing. And like I said, where I'm coming from with some of this is that I believe that painting is not just one art form. It's now in this new age, I see this as multimedia painting, right? In other words, I'm making a video of my painting process. I'm producing a work, the painting itself. I'm learning as I am talking to you and sharing with you my process. And therefore, all 3 or 4 of these pieces are coming together in such a way that they themselves constitute another form of art. That's what I'm suggesting. Now, here, to get back to this painting in front of me, I just mixed up a little bit more of the alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue, and I'm going into the larger tree group, and adding some branches. And notice how that right away produces a level of detail that was lacking beforehand. And it's really beginning to sharpen up the painting. It certainly is becoming the focus of the painting because our eye immediately is drawn to it. We can take several paths that I have hopefully consciously wanted you to take as a viewer up the river and to the woods, or looking at these greens in the foreground, and once again pushing you up this little bit of a hill or the angle here along the riverbank to that group of trees. One mistake that I noticed at this point in time as I was painting is that I think that it could be the case that some folks might go off the painting on the left side where the river is going. And so I'm going to add a little dead tree that's going to poke up from the grasses in the foreground up into the sky level on the other side of that painting to serve as a sort of bumper, keeping your eye within my painting, within the landscape. I'm also going, at this point, add the illusion of detail by adding just a few slight colors on the shoreline of those distant trees. Right now, that's in darkness, and yes, that's more like the reference photo. Whenever that pops up again, you can see that. But I want to give you something else to take a look at. And to me, it provides a little bit more of a sense of realism to see just a slight indication of what might be banks, the river banks over there, and some variation in the land masses across the river. There, I'm adding some illusions of detail. You saw with the liner brush, pulling up some of those colors, adding a few more darks to give the suggestion of an unmanicured grass line here by this tree grouping that's growing up and then perhaps casting a little bit of a shadow over the river. Now I'm working on putting some of those shapes into the foreground. Obviously, if there's any patch that doesn't have enough variety, it draws attention to itself, and it's usually not what we want in a painting. We want a lot of color, we want a lot of variation, we want things that will interest our viewers and keep them in the landscape. So here I noticed kind of an awkward shape over there on that mountain, and so I'm just taking the liner brush with the paint that's already on the surface and varying that edge, because also that's the way I'm viewing this. That's the edge of the riverbank that's farthest away from me. The ones that are on the left-hand side are obviously a little closer to us, and that's why the river looks like it's larger and longer, farther away. But it's kind of a mirage, right? Because as we go to the thinner part of this river, that's really where we are further from that shoreline across the way. Here, after I've put those darks, I'm making sure that we don't just see, obviously it would be kind of funny if you looked at a tree and you saw every branch and every trunk, and yet you don't see any leaves in front of that. That's kind of odd. So we're taking the liner brush and using the same pile of greens that I had still on the palette to suggest some growth, some leaves and other masses on the front of this tree that obscure some of those branches and tree trunks, just a little bit at least, to give you once again the illusion of that detail. Does that make sense? There's the landscape picture again, and notice I'm certainly taking liberties. I'm not attempting to provide you with an absolute an absolute match to that reference photo. To me, that would be one of the other mistakes. I think that there are far too many painters that think that the sole purpose of painting is to make a painting that looks exactly like the photo that you took. I think that is very boring to me. Every painting that I paint, I try to take the artist license and produce something that looks different than the photo I took to provide interest and artistry. I'm certainly using the reference photo or real life for inspiration for the painting. And oftentimes, there should be a kind of connection to that reference photo or experience in the painting, but I don't want it to be a one for one relationship. Does that make sense too? I'll give you an example. Joseph McGurl. Many of you may know that name. Very, very good, very famous plein air painter that's living today and producing artwork. So his method is he actually has a little frame that you can attach to your easel to the surface, and he's got it marked with a grid so that you see the scene right next to your canvas with this little contraption with the grid, and you can then paint exactly what you see on the canvas because he's all into realism and wanting to more closely match the landscape. So that's one approach. I think that leads for unartistic painting. That's just me. A lot of people love to see realism. I mean, extreme, what we might call super realism in that case. Now, Joseph McGurl will also tell you that one of the difficulties then is that you have to find the scene, the perfect scene that's going to work in the composition. What I find after my limited time of trying to do this is you very rarely find any scene that looks like that, where you could just, stand and say, okay, that's going to make a great painting. I'm going to paint exactly what's there. That's it. In other words, I find that more often than not, you have to add things to make a painting interesting because landscapes tend to be fairly boring and oftentimes fairly flat. Let me give you a couple examples in today's painting demonstration. It was a flat sky in that reference photo. Really no clouds whatsoever. Just basically a small color variation in the sky, and that was it. Well, I wanted more detail than that, and so I decided it's my painting. I want it to be a good painting. And so here, I am really trying to intensify the clouds so that there are points of interest for the viewer in the clouds. And here I am putting a little mixture of titanium white with a little bit of the Hansa yellow to give it that sense that there's a little bit of light flickering up there and make it a little bit warmer, not too cold. And here I am adding those little strokes. Notice I'm not really blending today too much to produce this effect. I'm trying just to randomly put these things in. I've got in my mind's eye a sense of what a cloud structure might work. And so I'm just putting it down there as quickly as I can and trying not to think too much about it so that it comes off as natural as possible. Now, hopefully you might think, wow, that must have been the sky he was looking at that day. That would be a compliment to me because obviously I'm using my imagination for that. And of course, if there's clouds up there, I'm thinking that some of those clouds are going to be reflected then down onto the river. And so I'm just adding a couple of those same strokes with that color on the river to indicate that reflecting. Now I'm also standing back and thinking, well, what else does this painting need? And I find that sometimes it's a color. The color that's missing here So, of course, red and blue make purple. So we got some purples in with the darks. But the other thing that we're missing is orange. And so at this point, I think that the composition is working, but I think the colors are just a little too dull and uninspiring. And so now I'm simply going to use this orange that I've mixed up to provide some different shades in the foreground. This could be leaves, it could be small plants that are growing here, but notice it's a warm color, so it's going to have the effect of warming up the scene some, which I think was way too cold, too many blues, too many greens. So we needed something to warm up this scene a little bit. And of course, the warmer colors are going to be closer to the viewer in the foreground. And so I'm just taking a round brush now. I'm taking that orange mixture that I mixed up on the palette, and I'm putting it in various spots as randomly as I can in the foreground so that it provides some relief for your eye. And notice how that seems, now with that orange, it seems to be closer to us. It's certainly warmed the scene up, and I think it has helped us in a number of other ways. Number one, it tells us that this might be fall, that this might be in September, that it might be in August when the photo was actually taken, because it's suggesting a sort of fall warmth to the landscape. Here, showing you another mixture that's going to become what I talked about, the illusion of detail, a shoreline on those far trees at near the very base of where that muddy river water is going and reaching the land shapes on the other side. And notice I'm just taking this round and adding a few places where this is a highlight there. I'm leaving some of it very dark, but at other strokes, I'm attempting to show you where there might be some logs or some kind of a little bit of a shoreline, or with rivers, sometimes there'll be a place where there's some land masses that now are uncovered because the water level is too low, and so they kind of peak up and give us these little land masses in the river space become too shallow. And so that's what I'm envisioning as I put that. Notice how it also draws your eye in. It draws some points of interest there, and then it's also like a broken line would, directing your attention towards that tree grouping that's on the right side of the painting. And so I'm actually quite pleased with the painting at this point in time. Then I noticed that this particular brown that's now on the other side of the river, it needs to have a complement over here. It's not going to be as light, but there are going to be spaces where you may see a little bit of the sandbar poking up near the edge of the river basin there. And so I'm putting some of that brown, darkened it a little bit, and now indicating with a few brush strokes where that's meeting up on the shoreline. Getting pretty close to the end of the painting now, as you can tell. It's an impressionistic work, but I hope that it also has elements of realism. I hope that some of the points, I've shared at least 7, I think, of both errors that oil painters make and people make in terms of their making of videos. Another mistake that I sometimes make, and I didn't do that as too much in this painting, which is I think that makes the painting better, is that sometimes we blend too much. If you find that you're constantly reaching for the fan brush and that many of your paintings end up looking sort of chalky or just not very sharp in terms of its colors, It may be that you're just using the fan brush too much. Try just laying down pieces of paint and allowing yourself to believe that that will work. Okay, here's the part I told you about this earlier. So I'm taking the liner brush. This is the number 2 Princeton Aspen line, and I am adding this sort of dead tree, which I think I did a nice job with it, actually. I think it comes off very lifelike, perhaps even better than the grouping of trees that's on the right hand side, if I must say so. And of course, whenever you're doing landscapes, you really do need to be careful about making sure that you are. Number one, you need the right brush to do this. You have to have a more of a detail brush, like a liner, to pull this off, and then create these branches by allowing your hand and the brush to kind of do all the work for you. Constantly re-wet the brush with paint using some medium or some water. In this case, if you're using water mixable oils. And then I'm just kind of pulling these branches. And notice the shapings. I don't want a bunch of branches going off the edge of the painting towards the left side. Just a couple in that direction. But everything else I want kind of intentionally flowing to the other. Now, obviously, this is not there. It wasn't there in that reference photo, right? So I'm taking artistic license and saying, okay, I know it wasn't there, but I'm going to put one in anyway. Why would I do that? Because I think that without it, your eye might have a tendency to slip off of the work of art and look to somebody else's painting on the other side. I want this to kind of keep you in the frame of reference so that you're constantly looking at the grouping of trees to the right and now to the left, and you're looking through those two figures, so to speak, to the river and then the tree line on the opposite side of the river, along with that river beach, if you will, or the sandbars that may be poking up near the edge of that river. Now, to provide just a little hint that these branches have some leaves or are capable of having some growth in it, maybe this is a tree that's kind of dying. They'll still have some leaves on it, and so here I am using the liner brush and just dipping it into some greens and gently coming back and giving the illusion of detail by randomly placing some of these green colors over top of these other colors. So I'm using some medium at this point to get this effect that this is a real tree that it once was living and thriving, but now something's happened to it. It's been diminished. It has still some signs of life, perhaps, in some of these little leaves on the edges of these branches, but not much. And there it is. Next, I'll be getting my rubber tool that's basically used to scrape paint off of a canvas surface, and I'm going to sign my name to the right, on the right side in the foreground, and then we'll pretty much be done. Here I'm just using my finger to take out a couple of irritating spots that I saw as I looked at the painting from a distance. Give it a go. Use this limited palette. See what colors you can achieve with it. Buy the power colors if you need them, which would be phthalo blue and cad red light, especially if you're going to be painting some fire trucks, I guess. And sometimes these little metal clips on an easel, you got to move those once in a while, so that way you can make sure that you don't end up with an awkward little place where paint didn't get applied or paint's rubbed off. And so that's what I'm doing there, to ensure that. And now here I'm signing the painting. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll have another one next week, so be sure to tune in.